August 13th, 1963, 330 feet below eastern Pennsylvania. A coal mine ceiling collapsed in 3 seconds, swallowing 3 men, killing the lights, and sealing the air shut. Rescuers reached the tunnel and turned back because re-entering was suicidal. Above ground, hundreds gathered, and the president was briefed. Below, 2 men sat in total darkness in a chamber 6 feet wide with the ceiling sinking toward their skulls. No food, light, or way to tell Tuesday from Sunday. They drank sulfur water from rock pools and gnawed bark off timbers. Every exhale loaded their sealed pocket with CO2 that at 10% kills outright. On day 6, a drill punched through 330 feet of rock, a microphone dropped down, and 2 voices answered. Both men, hallucinating independently in total blackness, claimed to have seen the same visions: a glowing door, marble steps, humanoid figures. To escape, they squeezed through a 17.5-inch pipe smeared in axle grease, dragged through 15 minutes of solid rock. A third man, separated by just 15 feet of rubble, never came up. Tuesday morning, August 13th, 1963. The Oneida Slope No. 2 operation of the Fellin Coal Company angles into a hillside between the villages of Oneida and Shepton in Schuylkill County, Pennsylvania. Single entry, 1 tunnel in, 1 tunnel out, with the kind of design that works perfectly until the one route fails, and then it works like a sealed coffin. This is not a corporate mine with engineers and ventilation systems and safety officers filing reports in triplicate. It is a patch-town operation held together by timber, habit, and the conviction that yesterday's luck qualifies as structural support. The timbers are local hardwood. The ventilation is whatever draft wanders in from the single entrance. The insurance is a prayer. David Fellin is 58 years old and a co-owner. He has spent decades underground, long enough to treat danger the way farmers treat weather. You respect it, you grumble about it, you keep working. Henry Throne is 28, still young enough to believe the mine follows rules. Louis Bova is the third man, positioned on the opposite side of the buggy tracks from the other 2, close enough to see, far enough that a few feet of separation will become the width of a grave. If you have never stood inside an anthracite mine, picture this: ceilings low enough to hunch under, corridors barely wide enough for a coal buggy, air that smells like wet iron and rot. Work lights strung on cables, dripping walls, constant noise, creaks, groans, pops. The mountain speaks in a language you learn only if you survive long enough to translate it. By 8 a.m., the crew loads the first buggy. Coal in, buggy up. The cart rolls toward daylight. It never comes back down. That is the first warning. The second is the sound. A deep, rolling rumble from inside the mine. Not one sharp crack, but a cascading failure, like a zipper opening across the ceiling of the earth. In later reconstructions, the trigger is described with blunt simplicity. A cable snaps on a loaded buggy, and the runaway car rips out timber supports as it careens downslope. In Throne's own telling, the buggy makes it only halfway before all hell broke loose. Wall timbers buckle, the ceiling timbers snap, coal and stone crash down in waves. Suddenly, the overhead power line severs, and there's an instant blackout, except for the lamps clipped to their helmets. Throne and Fellin are on the right side of the shaft. Bova is on the left, separated by the tracks. For a few seconds, they can still see him through the dust. Then the helmet lights dim in the haze. Now it is sound only. They holler for Bova, and he shouts back that he hurt his hip. Then the mine settles again. A secondary collapse that rumbles on for 90 minutes, Throne estimates. An aftershock that feels like the mountain is still making up its mind. When it finally quiets, the 2 men crawl over debris, hunting for tools and lunch pails. Most of it is already buried, and they salvage 1 hatchet. That is their entire toolkit. Then the helmet lamps burn out, and the matches will not light down here. Not enough oxygen to sustain a flame. This is the moment the event stops being a rescue story and becomes a psychological experiment. No light, no horizon, no way to mark time. When you cannot see your own hands, cannot ignite a match, cannot tell whether 5 minutes or 5 hours have passed, what happens to the part of you that needs a world to look at? And what happens to the man on the other side of the tracks, the one whose voice just went quiet? People sprint to the mine mouth and stare down into blackness, as if willpower alone can reach 330 feet. News crews arrive within hours and hundreds gather at the site. Somewhere nearby, in a church, a young mother clutches an 8-month-old baby and prays because she is married to the man trapped alone on the wrong side of the rubble. The rescue teams size up the entrance and abandon it almost immediately. The debris is so catastrophic that re-entering the tunnel is not difficult. It is suicidal. So the old method, dig in and crawl through, dies fast. They consult mind maps. They argue about coordinates until someone proposes the only move left. Stop trying to go in. Go down. Drill straight through 330 feet of hard rock from the surface and hope the bit lands inside a pocket of air instead of solid collapse. While that argument churns above, Fellin and Throne invent a new way to exist below. There is no day and no night. You cannot pace time by light, so you pace it by suffering. Throne estimates the temperature at roughly 30 degrees Fahrenheit. The mine is soaked, condensation, seepage, drips that sound like a clock nobody asked for. Their bodies burn calories just to shiver, which is grimly efficient, because calories are the one currency they do not have. They drink brackish, sulfur-laced water pooled in rock depressions. They gnaw bark off fallen timbers and suck moisture from the fibers, because even chewing becomes a task when your throat has been dry for days. Throne says he tracked the first couple of days by his fluorescent wristwatch. Then the darkness scrambles him. Morning and night dissolve. The weekdays lose their names, and even the watch face becomes meaningless when there is no event to hang a time on. They start crawling almost immediately because sitting still in total darkness feels like consenting to burial. With the hatchet, they feel their way over debris, hunting for any passage, any draft. They keep crawling. Throne later says they spent most 6 days circling through rubble, always winding back to the same dead ends, always finding nothing. Eventually, they settle into a cramped chamber Throne estimates at 6 feet long, 6 feet wide, and nearly 6 feet high on its tallest side. It is not roomy, but it holds air, a pocket sealed by collapse on every wall. That pocket is the only reason this story does not end on day 2. At roughly 3:15, Throne cannot tell if it is morning or night. He hears Bova holler through the rubble. This was the first and only time they heard his voice after the initial collapse. A single human sound from the other side of a wall of stone brought silence. Meanwhile, the ceiling keeps dropping. They shore it with fallen timbers, bracing and re-bracing like carpenters building a coffin in slow motion. By the final days, Throne says the clearance shrinks to about 18 inches between their heads and the roof. 18 inches. The thickness of 2 stacked textbooks. That is what space means after 2 weeks underground. Feeling like a shrinking pocket, the air itself turns hostile. At rest, a human cycles roughly 5 to 8 liters of air per minute. In a sealed chamber, that arithmetic becomes chemistry, making oxygen fall, climbing carbon dioxide minute by minute. But CO2 does not just suffocate, it intoxicates. A mix of headache, confusion, impaired judgment, and loss of consciousness make every unnecessary breath accelerate the clock. So panic becomes a luxury item they cannot afford. They manufacture calm the only way 2 freezing men can. Throne sits with his legs spread. Fellin sits between them, back to chest, and Throne breathes on Fellin's neck to share warmth. Then they switch, rocking back and forth for circulation. They sleep face to face, arms locked, waking every half hour as the cold yanks them back. On day 5, Throne says this is the closest they come to death, not from gas, but from terror. Rain begins above ground, even though they cannot see it. They can hear the water rushing through old drainage pipes below their chamber, the sound amplifying off stone walls until it fills the pocket like a rising tide. Already cracked by darkness and starvation, they become convinced the mine will flood and drown them. For 20 minutes, the sound of rain becomes its own apocalypse, 2 men pressing themselves against the highest point of an 18-inch ceiling, waiting for water that would give them no warning and no escape. Time passes and the rain stops, but the fear does not leave, it just changes shape. And inside that new shape, the visions arrive. Not flickers, no random sparks behind closed eyelids, but a door. A regular house door standing in the bottom of a coal mine. Throne shouts for Fellin to follow him through it. Fellin has to deliver the cruelest truth. There is nowhere to go. What does absolute darkness do to a mind that has been stripped of every external reference for 6 straight days? And why would 2 men, hallucinating independently, claim to see the exact same images? The hallucinations arrive like a broadcast both men are tuned to, and Throne is the first to admit it. He sees a dark shape, a miner standing in the black with a helmet lamp glowing faint and yellow, and he shouts for help because what else do you do when salvation appears 10 feet away from you in the dark? But the figure shrinks as he crawls toward it, pulling away from the center of his vision like a projection being switched off, collapsing into nothing. And then it reappears, always ahead, always retreating, always just far enough to keep him moving and just false enough to keep him broken. A door rimmed with blue light behind it, marble steps. Not coal steps, not timber. Marble, like a cathedral built inside the earth. It proves the brain is still capable of constructing beauty when reality offers none. At one point, Throne breaks and screams that he is going home. He says he will go alone if Fellin does not come. That sentence matters because it is the sentence you say when your mind tries to evacuate your body, when home stops meaning a place and starts meaning escape. Later, the visions escalate and humanoid figures, Throne describes them as wearing something like spacesuits. He could see a glowing city and even a religious icon, Pope John XXIII, appearing to smile down at them, a detail that turns a survival story into a theological flashpoint. The rational frame holds up under scrutiny. Prolonged sensory deprivation, sleep deprivation, starvation, and extreme stress can all trigger hallucinations in people who are not psychotic. Oxygen deprivation contributes, and an elevated CO2 alters the nervous system and distorts perception. So the brain, starved for stimulus and desperate for pattern, turns inward and begins running simulations, painting a door on a blank wall, because a door is psychologically easier to endure than a stone sentence of death. But the shared part, the part where both men report seeing the same images, is where even the skeptics slow down. One explanation is folie à deux. The more dominant personality describes an image with conviction, and the other man, exhausted and suggestible, adopts it, not lying, not performing, but merging realities because a shared hallucination is less terrifying than solitude. Another explanation is purely functional. The visions calm the men. They slow Throne's thrashing. They give Fellin a role as an anchor to the younger man. And each time panic ebbs, breathing slows, and the chemistry of the chamber shifts by fractions of a percent. Down there, fractions are everything. If you are still watching a story about 2 men sharing hallucinations 330 feet underground while a third man goes silent on the other side of a wall, hit subscribe. Because the next chapter is where the surface finally punches a hole through rock, and what comes up through that hole will determine whether you remember these names tomorrow or never hear them again. Bond the surface. Someone finally says the sentence that converts a vigil into a mission. Stop assuming they are dead. How do you aim a 6-inch drill bit from 330 feet above and hit a pocket of air you cannot see, in geology that shifts with every vibration? And what happens when the bit breaks through and nobody answers? The rescue crews sink boreholes as scouting probes, narrow 6-inch shafts designed to answer one binary question. Is there a chamber below, or just crushed rock? One training manual later calls the 6-inch borehole at Shepton the first such attempt in a mining rescue anywhere. Whether it was the first on Earth or simply the first that worked, the concept is the same. When you cannot reach trapped miners through tunnels, you try to reach them the way you reach oil. Straight down with a borehole that does not drift politely, it can wander. A few degrees of deviation at the surface becomes feet of error at 330. Miss the chamber and you do not just miss the men, you miss the only proof they are alive. The drill bites into rock. Below, the men hear vibrations that could be hope or could be the next collapse traveling toward them. Which fear is worse, dying without being found, or being found and watching the rescue fail? The bit breaks into open space. Still no one is cheering. They listen. Opening space could mean the mine, but it could also mean nothing. A self-powered field telephone is lowered, but it is not enough. So a 19-year-old radio engineer named Phil Margush improvises. He does not have 300 feet of microphone cable, so volunteers collect household extension cords from nearby homes and splice them together with electrical tape. They lower an RCA microphone down the shaft and route the signal through a reel-to-reel recorder as a monitor. At first, only dripping water and echoes. Then someone at the surface says, "I think I hear voices," and the cave talks back. Margush sits at that recorder for the next day and a half straight, treating it like a cardiac monitor for the entire town. After about 36 hours without sleep, he collapses from exhaustion. Above the hole, the rescue becomes a spectacle. CBS arrives, network crews follow. Crowds swell until people joke you could sell popcorn around a mine shaft. And all the while, the men below can hear the world overhead, voices echoing down steel casing, rope creaking, tools clanking, a civilization they can hear but cannot touch. A microphone goes down, amplifiers go up. Family members speak into a hole and hear a loved one answer from 330 feet below. The men receive water, food, medication, and an electric light. Actual light slicing into the chamber for the first time in 6 days. The borehole becomes an airway, bad air bleeding up while cleaner air seeps down. They lower a small loudspeaker so the miners can hear the surface. It fails, and they revert to shouting into the hole like it is 1890. But here is the cruel arithmetic again. A 6-inch borehole can keep you alive, but it cannot make you safe. It just extends the terror. The men report something that reroutes the entire rescue emotionally. There is a third man, separated by rubble somewhere nearby but unreachable from their chamber. A wall of stone so thin you could measure it in feet, and it might as well be the moon. The hole is 6 inches. A lifeline, not an exit. No human body is coming up through that, so the rescue evolves into something that barely exists in mining tradition. A man-sized shaft, drilled straight down through hard rock, without collapsing the roof over the men it is trying to save. In one widely cited account, the massive drill is provided by billionaire Howard Hughes, flown to a nearby airport by a Navy plane, and hauled to the site under escort. Carbide tungsten bits grind through stone as the rock fights back. President Kennedy reportedly follows the story from the White House and sends a message, because even the Oval Office cannot resist a miracle in progress. Below, the men wait and the chamber trembles. Sometimes the vibration feels like the roof itself is breathing. Other times it feels like a threat. One more drill strike and the ceiling might surrender entirely. The special rig begins drilling around August 20th and keeps going until August 27. 14 days after the collapse, the bit nuzzles through the chamber roof. Light punches into darkness for the first time since August 13th. But the shaft is only 17.5 inches in diameter, and it is jagged, rougher than intended. Exit is still not guaranteed, so the question becomes brutally physical. Do you trust a pipe you cannot turn around in? 17.5 inches. That is the clearance between being a story told on television and being a body that never comes back. Down the shaft comes the equipment, coveralls with harnesses sewn in, parachute-type straps, a helmet and an axle grease, the kind made for machines, not skin, unless a machine is the only metaphor that fits what you are about to do. They smear it on each other. Shoulders, hips, and ribs, anything that could catch on rock. Anything that could turn a human body into a jammed object inside a tube. Because if you snag, you do not just suffer, you create a new crisis. Stuck in the pipe, the surface can pull but cannot see. It cannot reach in and adjust you. It can only yank and wait and hope the stone releases. Fellin insists Throne goes first. The younger man, the one closer to panic, the one more likely to freeze if something jams above him. Throne lifts off the chamber floor, and suddenly he is no longer in a mine. He is inside a pipe with exactly one direction. He rises, friction screams, rock scrapes his body through layers of grease. His arms are pinned above his head. He cannot wipe his face, cannot adjust his position, cannot do anything except trust the cable and the strangers operating the winch 330 feet above. Time turns elastic in a space the diameter of a small barrel. Every bump where the shaft narrows or jags could be the end of the ascent, the point where bone meets geology and neither gives. And because humans are allergic to pure terror, he cracks a joke mid-ascent. What a ride this is. I feel like a banana. That line shows up in newspaper coverage like a flare, proof his mind is still intact enough to be funny. The ascent takes 15 minutes. 15 minutes for a human body to travel a distance you could sprint in under 10 seconds, if you were not inside stone. His head clears the opening at approximately 2:07 a.m. He emerges covered in grease, blinking in floodlights. Air hits him like a drug. Sound hits him like a wall. Hands grab him. He is out. Fellin goes next. His ascent takes 8 minutes. He surfaces bearded, gaunt, and alive and starts singing. She'll be coming round the mountain. That is not joy. That is defiance. That is a man proving the mind does not get to choose his last sound. 2 men out, 14 days down. The rescue is called a miracle, and it is, but miracles cast a shadow because there were 3. That night, officials announced efforts will resume immediately to reach the 3rd miner. More holes are drilled, more listening, more hope that someone will tap back. Nothing answers, no body is recovered. The mine is later sealed with Louis Bova still inside it. Official accident registers list Bova as the fatality of August 13, 1963, at the Fellin coal operation. Above the sealed site, a marker stands for a man whose body remains underground. His son was 8 months old on the morning the ceiling fell. 2 men come up through 17.5 inches of rock and become a legend, but a 3rd stays down, separated by about 15 feet of rubble and one wrong side of the tracks. If the drill had been a few feet off target, Fellin and Throne would have died unheard. If the bore had been half an inch narrower, a shoulder could have snagged inside the pipe and ended the story in the shaft. If a single timber had fallen differently, the air pocket might not have held long enough for a voice to answer on day 6. That is what Shepton exposes. Survival is not always a trophy for strength. Sometimes it is a receipt for being positioned correctly when the world collapses. 2 men stood on the right side of a set of buggy tracks on a Tuesday morning in August, and a 3rd stood on the left. The distance between those positions was measured in feet. The distance between their fates was measured in forever. The men who lived did not defeat the mine. They were simply the ones the mine did not finish. If you ever wonder how narrow the distance is between survival and disappearance, remember this. On a mountain, it can be measured in a single step. And if you want to see what happens when that margin is not a step, but a choice made in darkness, with a broken body, no rope team left, and a glacier waiting below, that story is already there for you. https youtube.com/watch. Enfim, 17 ubiachiki, vídeo de Outlived.